I would like to introduce John Gray. Today we're going to be talking about everything from natural autism strategies to how to keep the romance alive for parents. Many of you guys might know John Gray, who is the author of the most well-known and trusted relationship book of all time, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Welcome, John. How are you?
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be talking to you. And I've had a lot of people wondering, how does lasting romance, what does it have to do with autism? Well, from one perspective, any autism has to do with the brain, and relationships have to do with the brain. And when we can have optimal brain function, we can make plenty of dopamine and serotonin and GABA, and we can experience motivation and happiness as well as optimism. So this is all about being healthy, to have better relationships, and of course for our children to be healthy as well.
And, I'm a huge fan of yours. I remember reading the book and just really following your work. For those out there, that are kind of wondering, how is this all relating? And I loved your explanation. But can we maybe start off of why you're so passionate about autism?
Well, I'm passionate about autism. It started about 16 years ago for me. I'm 65 now, and as I was turning 50, I had Parkinson's, early-stage Parkinson's, involuntary shaking when I would start to focus. And, just getting the standard treatment for that doesn't cure it, doesn't heal it. It only gets worse and worse over time. You become dependent on the medication, so forth. So I looked for alternatives, and I figured out that the shaking, the involuntary shaking, is very similar to what happens when a drug addict is no longer getting their dopamine fix from the drug. And so I then researched the alternative treatment centers which would help drug addicts go off of drugs without side effects by putting IV drips into their bloodstream of amino acids and NAD, which is a form of vitamin B3. And it helps to regenerate brain cells and restore normal brain function. So I was able to get that treatment and reverse my symptoms, and then they came back, and I did it again and reversed my symptoms. And so then I realized I needed something to sustain the benefits so the condition did not come back or get worse or so forth. And then I realized that taking good supplements every day, pre-digested protein, big key to it, mineral supplements and vitamins, and then, of course, the probiotics in the gut so that your body can actually eventually fully digest the proteins for you, so you're not so dependent upon taking pre-digested proteins. So as I did that for myself, I began realizing what a difference it made for my relationship. While I was having a great relationship, it got easier and better, and my connection was deeper with my wife, and that's because my brain was producing the right brain chemicals. In a sense, I was undiagnosed for that, as many successful people are, and, where you can sort of become hyper-focused on your work and so forth, but it's easy to then disconnect from your family and your wife. And suddenly that shifted for me, just taking the right nutrition every day. So I'm a big fan of extra nutrition because our diet just doesn't provide it. And for our children who had ADD, ADHD-type symptoms, the same treatment that helped me for Parkinson's helps them almost immediately. And a variety of that helps children with autism. So I opened up a wellness clinic, and I was having autistic children come to see what it would do for them, and they were getting big benefits as well. But I closed the clinic because my liability was great. I'm not a medical doctor. I required people to bring their medical doctor with them. But even still, it was costly for people to travel around the country to bring their children and get benefits, and I became vulnerable to lawsuits. So I closed that down, but I still teach those ideas. I'm passionate about helping, children be healthy and helping our mothers and fathers stay together so they can raise children together as well.
Absolutely, especially in the autism community. I'm a parent myself with a child with autism, and my son's father and I, we co-parent together, and, we had to learn that even though there was a lot of stress and even though there was a lot of tension, we had to remember that, we had our child because we loved each other, and how did we get past that stress, and how do we put our son first? And, I talk to so many families that, they're at a constant state of war with their significant others or their exes. And I feel like even if you're no longer together with your spouse, or significant other, there's still ways to figure out how to bring that family unit together. So I'm excited to kind of jump in with that later on. But before we do, I before our talk today, I the last couple of days have been looking at all your videos online, and I've been taking notes and just so excited to see all of your information. And one of the things, one of the videos you have, or talks about, what do parents need to know about ASD. So I kind of wanted to touch a little bit on that before we get into the romance part, right? Because I think that
communication part.
yeah.
The stress part.
Absolutely. I think that I was, I've been staying up real late in the evenings and getting ready for all these interviews, and I really have enjoyed watching your videos. And so I think for the parents that are listening, definitely we'll make sure to give your links at the end, but definitely go watch his videos. They're very informative, and they're easy to watch too, which I really liked. It wasn't something that, sometimes you watch a video and it's super long and you kind of get bored through it, or sometimes it's kind of doesn't make sense, or they're not really talking to you. I felt like your videos are really talking to me, and they were just really, for lack of a better word, easy to digest. And so, what do parents need to know about autism spectrum disorder, in your opinion?
Well, that's a vast. Let's take one piece at a time. First of all, when you have an autistic child, the stress level is dramatically increased. The amount of time and attention you put into your children, and the frustration of that, trying to balance your schedule, trying to understand each other, it puts us on edge, and it's harder for parents to communicate with each other. And part of my message is to help women and men understand that biologically, as parents, we're wired up differently. And for women to cope with stress, they need particular types of support. For men to cope with stress, they need particular types of support. And that really comes down to a biological difference of the hormone testosterone is what regulates happiness inside of men, meaning that if his testosterone levels are low, his stress levels are high. His stress hormones will be high. And for both men, when our stress hormones are high, it's very hard to come from a place of love and unconditional love, forgiveness, flexibility, empathy. Empathy is literally impossible when we're experiencing a fight or flight reaction. And that's a challenge for our children because they're in fight or flight reaction almost all the time. And that's why they have so many expanding health challenges if we can't help them get to the basis of lowering their stress responses. And we'll get to that in a moment. But for parents, just to know that for men, testosterone goes up when men feel successful. Testosterone goes down when men don't feel successful. And every parent, the happiness of your child is what kind of the measure of success. And if you feel like there's nothing you can do to make your child happy, it's really hard on testosterone levels. And so men tend to experience high stress at that time. And to compensate for that, he needs ways to rebuild his testosterone. His wife can know ways to stimulate more testosterone in him. So that's A. On the other side of it is a woman. And for women, when they feel that they do not have the resource to provide the support their children need, that's a major stressor for them. That's called the nurturing gene, so to speak. And the time, the energy, the resources is so important to be able to nurture the people you love, your child, all of your children. And there's just not enough time. There's not enough resources, and there's not enough knowledge. So this can be highly stressful for women. And what it will do is it will lower their estrogen levels. And estrogen is the hormone that primarily regulates the stress hormone in women for the first 12 days of her cycle. Then what happens after she ovulates, for the next 12 days of her cycle, estrogen is significant, but more important is progesterone. And progesterone is the hormone of social bonding or time for herself. And certainly when you have an autistic child, you have no time for yourself, and you often sacrifice social bonding for your child. And it's very, very important to regulate stress, is that women, they need to have a certain kind of support from their partner, and that's called pair bonding support, where you can depend on your partner for a particular kind of support. And I'll talk about the most powerful kinds of support in a moment. Social bonding is where you're like playing cards with friends, playing games, where you're not the person in charge of taking care of a child, but you have support. There's a gathering of other adults together having a pleasurable time. That's going to be social bonding. That's necessary to stimulate the hormone to lower stress. And then there needs to be time away from others where you're doing things just for yourself, in a sense, selfish time. That also creates the progesterone needed, particularly in the second part of her cycle. And when you don't create those times for yourself or for socializing or for intimate partner, and verbal intimacy actually is the most powerful, which we'll get to, that's the pair bonding. When you don't create that for yourself, often mothers will not create that for themselves because they feel their children need them so much more. And ultimately what children need most is mothers whose stress levels are low, so that there's a level of empathy and relaxation that she's experiencing rather than kind of a chronic state of stress. Is this ringing any bells for you?
Yeah, I'm listening, going, he's just like talking about my life. Absolutely.
Right. And just to mention it again, another aspect of this, which is a little bit, it's going to be challenging, but at least for a mother of an autistic child, but keep it as a North Star at least. No one ever is perfect. We never achieve anything perfectly, but we need to know the right direction to go in, and that's always going to help us. The North Star here is those three types of support. And here's the third, the next thing under that category is even if you don't have an autistic child, but you just have children, quite often when a divorce happens, you want to compensate for the lack of another parent there. And I'm glad you're committed to co-parenting, but often there's a parent will compensate and say, well, the mother's not here or the father's not here, so I have to devote all my time to my child and not have an adult relationship. And what that does, that puts another pressure on the child to make the mother happy or make the father happy. And that to give more to our children, we need to make sure that we are able to sustain these adult relationships in our life, because it's kind of like we all need certain vitamins. Particularly our autistic children need extra vitamins. And when one vitamin is missing, it can throw all the others off. So it's trying to create a balance of these different things. And in creating that awareness actually gives us more permission, because we love our children so much we can easily feel guilty if we don't give them everything we have. And the key to it is to realize that you have less and less and less if you don't also create time for yourself to enjoy the intimacy of an adult relationship, the social bonding that occurs when you're having fun with other adults. And even a card game, even getting together, making dinner together, a sewing circle, some of these old-fashioned things actually were there, particularly for women, in order to stimulate this important hormone called progesterone, which lowers a woman's stress during the second part of her cycle. So these are insights that most people are not aware of and can be very helpful. And just, a practical example of pair bonding. Now, pair bonding is where I need help and you're helping me. So when a woman ever goes into pair bonding where she's feeling I need help and someone is outside herself is helping her, that will stimulate estrogen. The person who's helping her, that will stimulate testosterone. So mothers of autistic children are constantly, providing for their children. They need to be in situations to balance that for about 8 days of the month where they feel somebody is there for them for those important days around ovulation, before ovulation. That's when her estrogen levels need to go up if she's able to regulate stress. And so one of the most powerful ways to do that is to vent your feelings. Now, the most efficient way of venting feelings is to say to somebody, I just want to talk. I don't say anything. You don't have to fix anything. I'm not looking for advice. It might sound that way, but I'm not. I just want to feel the closeness of someone knowing what I'm going through. And that's, of course, why support groups with women together is so important who are, challenged in a similar ways. But the emotions you want to try to access during that 10 minutes several times a week is being able to articulate into words so another person can understand and feel your frustration, your disappointments, and your concerns, and even feelings of embarrassment, and then feelings of gratitude and appreciation for the support you have. These are new skills that are very, very helpful for restoring the estrogen levels when we're being faced with stress so much of the time. And if a couple is with a husband, a man who's facing stress, it's very different from women. And what he needs is separate time. So he goes to work, he has his job, that builds up his testosterone, but also uses it up. And men need some kind of downtime where they don't have to worry about solving any problems. That used to be a hobby, or watching sports, a time for him to sort of forget his problems. But when you have an autistic child, you have to put so much attention into that child. Men are not taking the time they need. They feel guilty. My gosh, taking time for myself, my child needs me. But that's a problem he has to solve, and that's going to, over time, deplete his testosterone. And that causes, moodiness, irritability, tiredness, fatigue, when men don't take the time they need. And so if you don't recognize what our needs are as adults to have more to give to our children, we can often feel so guilty that we don't take the time for ourselves. And so I've written, this is a lot in my most recent book, which is Beyond Mars and Venus, helping us to understand the biology of recovering from stressful situations. Because when your stress levels are lower, then you can have greater empathy, greater peacefulness, greater calm to support your child.
Well, it's interesting as you're saying all of this. Well, everything you're saying relates to me, and I'm sure to the listeners and the families as well. We get the diagnosis of autism for our child, and it's first they don't really give you any real direction on what to do for that, right? There's basically, like, if you're lucky to get a pamphlet of maybe a couple of websites, but other than that, you're kind of lost in space. And one thing I wish that they would do, and maybe one day they will, and hopefully that people listening to this interview, hopefully it helps, because I wish that they would say, okay, here's the diagnosis, and yes, there's going to be a lot of work ahead. However, we need to work on the marriage and the family unit first to keep that foundation, solid, because we're not giving those tools, and there's nothing given to us to say this is what your next steps need to be. And so as you're speaking about a woman venting, for example, I can even think of my own personal life, right? I'm thinking when I vent, I probably might be a little naggy, right, and a little resentful. And so, how does that sound to the person hearing that? And so learning how to vent in a healthy way, learning how to communicate in a healthy way, because our kids feel everything. They feel the negative energy. They feel the fighting. They feel the stress levels. So I feel like if we can help that foundation, if nothing more, imagine all the other therapies and all the diets and all the supplements that you are giving your kid. Imagine how much better that can be for that child. I've been in the community about 13 years, and I wish I would have learned that like day one. But
one of the first. Thank you for that. That was beautiful, and that's absolutely true. And everything I say about relationship is not to minimize or discard wisdom of diet, nutrition, and all of that. And hopefully we'll have time to get into what one of my experiences with that. But when it comes to relationships and how it affects our children, it's going to affect your relationship affects an autistic child even more because of their inability to articulate clearly what they feel. It's just these feelings come up and just they express as opposed to be able to be organized in a logical way to make sense of over time. And so what happens is, whether it be an autistic child or any child that's young, is that, or even older, if they're connected to you as parents, if you're the parents, then what occurs is, when I wrote about it in my first book in 1984, it's a principle called what you suppress, the feelings, emotions that you suppress inside, trying to hold it together, your children will feel and express. So it's like they have their own, traumas to upset, their emotional, frustrations of not feeling heard, not feeling understood, not feeling seen, not being able to communicate in a language where they feel heard and understood. That's a massively stressful experience for children already. Then add to it your own frustration. It's as if everything that you're not dealing with as a parent, it builds up inside. There's a pressure that venting allows you to release, so to speak, if we can use those simple terms. But if you don't release it, let go of it in a sense, be heard, be understood, then what happens, pushing it down, it will tend to exaggerate and express through our children. So let me give an example that any parent can relate to. On those days when you're really feeling like the pressure's building up and you're kind of just holding it together, it's those days when your children tend to explode. It's those days when your children are least manageable. It's those days when your children are overly emotional. And it can also show up like when you're at the grocery store. When you're really pressured that your child behave a certain way, you already have that sense of embarrassment and trying to control. That's often, once again, for many children, that's when they'll act out, is because they're feeling that pressure they don't know what it is. They just comes up inside of them, and it's going out of control. So it's when we as adults feel out of control, the emotions of that are fight or flight. We push it down trying to maintain control. It tends to get pushed into our children. So psychically, if we could say, emotionally through the connection, they will literally act it out. And the tension between mom and dad, children will act out. I hear from stories from parents who will send their children to their grandparents, and the children behave perfectly. But when the children are at home, the tension in the home tends to cause the child to act out. Whereas put the child in a situation where there isn't a lot of that tension, and also where the child isn't so intimately connected with the people around them, they're not going to be acting out. But when it's parental stuff, our children tend to act it out, and they experience high levels of glutamate in the brain, which is this brain stress hormone, which then activates cortisol and adrenaline in the body, which interferes with digestion, causes more inflammation in the gut, causes more problems in the brain, which are all started originally because there's inflammation in the gut, because digestion isn't working. So ultimately, on a biological level, we replenish our children with the nutrients they're not getting from food. That's why there's so many complicated, sophisticated food regimes for children with autism that sometimes will help, because they're literally not getting anything from the food, because you can't digest and assimilate your nutrients from your food if your digestion isn't working properly. And if your digestion isn't working, it will cause you to not make enough brain chemicals, which makes you more vulnerable to stress. You have stress problems. Cortisol, stress hormones inhibit digestion. The wisdom of this is historically human beings were not under chronic stress. It was only occasional, like you're being chased by a bear, so to speak, or you're attacking an animal or on a hunt. And at those times, digestion is not so important. So the body literally, when you're under stress, it takes the energy away from digestion and puts it into the muscles so that you can, run faster, and puts it into the conditioned, more almost instinctive part of the brain, and not in the front part of the brain where we have language skills, where we can talk and so forth. And so, many of our children, they have such high stress levels, it's very hard for the brain to develop at that point. It's very hard for them to digest their food. And so one of the key solutions is, to provide foods which are more easily digested, but also nutrients which are already available so the child can assimilate them. That's why, in a short sentence, why it's so important that we provide extra supplementation to our children, other than just giving them what we consider to be healthy food. That's another big part of it. But supplements are very important.
Now, I want to go back to romance, but since we are talking about diet, I wanted to talk a little bit. You brought up inflammation, and some of the stuff that I watched on you and your work, you talk about inflammation of the brain. Can you explain a little bit of why you think, what your thought is, I guess, on that and the importance of that? Because I know you have some great natural strategies on that.
Well, I have a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm listeners, because you can start wherever you are. Some are more sophisticated, some are just starting out. But kind of just to understand many of the causes of autism, there's nobody that can say absolutely there's one cause, because there's many things that can contribute to it. But if you get down to a systemic level, kind of the systems of the body, is anytime we're making energy. Okay, so this is a little science lesson for just a moment, but it's good for people to have a simple way of understanding something which is very complex. There's something called inflammation in the brain, and inflammation in the brain is caused by oxidative stress. Now, there's 150,000 studies on oxidative stress, and yet nobody listening would actually understand it, nor would your doctor say you need to treat oxidative stress, because it's always there in any challenged health situation. You find something which is called oxidative stress, which is measurable, and it causes chronic inflammation, which interferes with normal functioning of the brain. So I don't want to get too complex, but inflammation, the first thing is, everybody knows if you have a cut, then suddenly the skin will swell up. It will turn red. Okay, it turns red to deliver more blood to that area, which delivers more oxygen, which also delivers in the immune system something called macrophages that can go in, because wherever there's damage, you have to there's a bacteria infection. There's bacteria that are overpopulating, and they actually serve a purpose, by the way. That bacteria that comes about is potentially in the body, and it quickly multiplies to do a job, which is to eat up the dead tissue. So that's an infection. But what happens is you can have infections that don't heal. And why would that be? Well, basically, whenever you make energy, there's a byproduct is something called free radicals. That could be from thinking, crying, upset, exercising, and certainly from toxic foods. Have a lot of these free radicals. But the body naturally makes free radicals, and then the body naturally makes antioxidants. These are two terms everybody hears about but don't fully understand and how they work together. Your body has its own natural source of antioxidants, even if you're not eating them. Although it's good to eat more antioxidants, it's a good thing. There's certain herbs, like curcumin. Curcumin is from cumin, from curry, has been known to be a super great antioxidant. Vitamin E is a great antioxidant. Vitamin E is a great antioxidant. But what are these? Blueberries, great antioxidant. What are these antioxidants? But they're molecules that have an extra electron. And these electrons, extra electrons, we commonly call my mind's getting a little too complex here. Let me come back to, we have the free radicals, which are excess positive charges, and we call those free radicals. And then we have all of the beneficial anti-inflammatories, which have extra electrons. And you eat the blueberries, and a blueberry has extra electrons, and they will simply neutralize those free radicals, kind of like a positive and negative charge, neutralize each other. Well, what happens is when our body has an excess of free radicals, the body will suddenly make antioxidants. Okay, antioxidants. And these antioxidants are in your blueberries, and they're in your good foods, and they're in your curcumin. That was the word that sort of slipped my mind for a moment, antioxidant. And your body actually makes an antioxidant called glutathione. Now, the reason I said all of that to go to the point that your body makes plenty of glutathione in order to fight off these free radicals. Now, let's introduce something which is toxic to the body, a heavy metal. Let's put some aluminum in the bloodstream, or let's put some mercury in the bloodstream, and it gets into the brain. That's a free radical. Mercury and aluminum and various other toxic substances, they're called a neurotoxin. When they get into the brain, they will continually produce these free radicals, more than your body makes. And your body wants to fight those free radicals by making more glutathione. And it will do that when there's so many free radicals, it will do that by generating a fever. Now, the fever produces something that allows your glutathione levels to go to a much higher level. In most cases where children became autistic, something happened in the brain, which is where they were running a fever and their body could not make enough glutathione in order to stop the oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is more free radicals than antioxidants. So when you have a free radical, what it does, if you don't have antioxidants, it will find another cell and rip out a negative ion, destroy that cell, or make it dysfunctional. That dysfunctional cell will then go off and take another negative ion from another healthy cell, and then it will continue doing it. That's called cascading effect of stress. And that's what's going on in the brain of anybody with any kind of mental imbalance, is there are these permanent, almost permanent infections that are producing inflammation again and again and again that interfere or derail the normal development of the brain. And that derailing is what happens in autism. It happens in dementia. It happens in Asperger's syndrome. It happens, at all levels of depression and anxiety. There's always this oxidative stress going on in the brain. And there's certain substances that can help us to put out that fire of oxidative stress. Now, ideally, our body would be able to do it by making enough glutathione. Now, glutathione is unfortunately depressed today because either we don't have the probiotics in our gut, in order to make it, or we eat a lot of sugar, which suppresses glutathione, or we take drugs, and drugs will definitely suppress glutathione, prescribed or non-prescribed. And the most challenging, the most powerful drug to suppress glutathione is anything that suppresses a fever. So that's your acetaminophen. Acetaminophen, which is in Tylenol, and 500 other over-the-counter drugs, is the worst thing you can ever take to, it creates a symptomatic relief, a pain relief, or suppresses fever, but then it suppresses glutathione. And glutathione is what would protect the brain. So in the case of Parkinson's, sometimes if you just do an IV drip, that means putting the glutathione into your bloodstream, your Parkinson's symptoms will disappear temporarily because you suddenly got the fireman to put out the fire. But it's not permanently out. You have to do it again and again. Better to help your body make it rather than take it. So we know with autistic children, giving them glutathione can be very helpful for many children, but better to make it than to take it. Well, what I discovered 15 years ago when I was healing my brain, learning to heal my brain and make glutathione to take away the Parkinson's, is I tried out a technique which was from Germany called the cure when nothing else works, which is to heat up the brain and to induce a fever in the brain by lying in hot water. And I write about that in my book, Staying Focused in a Hyper World, and helping the brain heal. And finally, after teaching this and having a center where I would do this with autistic children and so forth, it's putting them in hot water and seeing immediate benefits. They did a study in England. People like the studies. So the study was done in England with 30 children. They put them in a bathtub for a normal bathtub, about 98 to 99 degrees water, and nothing happened. But then they put them, the same children, later another time, they put them in a bathtub of 102 degrees. I recommend 103. But they did 102 degrees in 30 minutes, and they found that there was improvement for all children. And why would there be improvement for all children in their terms of their symptoms? Dramatic improvement. And then eventually it goes away. Well, that's because when you induce a fever, your body makes something called heat shock proteins. And these heat shock proteins stop oxidative stress for 48 hours, or they lessen it, and give your body a chance to now suddenly build up and make more glutathione. So your glutathione will increase, primarily produced by the liver, and the heat shock proteins last about 48 hours, which give you a big boost, opportunity for the battle between the oxidative stress and the antioxidants, they have to neutralize. And so it gives you plenty more antioxidants during that time where you're running the fever. Now, this was all based upon back 15 years ago. I was hearing stories from mothers of autistic children that when their children ran a fever, they got sick and ran a fever, their symptoms of autism often went away completely or partially, but then it would come back when the fever was over. So this was even on a Charlie Rose TV show. I heard, quote, big experts from different universities saying anecdotally, mothers are reporting that children running fevers, their symptoms temporarily go away. Now there's a study also showing that when children with autism run fevers, their symptoms temporarily go away. Well, even 100 years ago, they knew that the temporariness was because you need to do it every 48 hours. Because heat shock proteins, we now know scientifically, last about 48 hours in the body. Repeat it. So that's something most parents can easily do, is do a hot bath ideally for an hour, slowly build up the water from about 98 degrees to 100 degrees to 103 degrees, and even hotter if the child can tolerate that. And this will induce a low-grade fever in the brain, producing these heat shock proteins. And that was the old treatment, and I've done that with kids and seen tremendous results. Now you combine that with other supplements, and you have more powerful results.
Now I have a question. What about like a jacuzzi or something that doesn't have chlorine? Because there's some natural jacuzzis out there, or spas, I should say, because you can regulate the temperature almost perfectly there. I watched on your video that if you can't, one of the techniques that you had recommended was the child to kind of lay on their back and have their face kind of just emerged, but their ears and head to be warm. But when I was watching that, I was thinking, well, I don't know. Like for my son, when I was thinking about it, was I don't know how I could get him to stay that way. But then later, he said for kids that can't, then he recommended like some type of like a hat of some sort to keep the warmth in. And I got me thinking, what about like a jacuzzi or a spa and putting the hat on in there? Would that
That's
be something that
perfect.
would work?
That works great. That works great. And it will be perfectly fine. And you can actually start a jacuzzi. You can keep your jacuzzi at, say, around 100 and then turn it up to, 104. And while you're in there for an hour, it will gradually make it up to that temperature. You can, find with your own jacuzzi what are the rates. But the way the Germans recommended it, it was 20 minutes at around 97, 98, 20 minutes at 101, and 20 minutes at 103, 104. And you'll go to different spas and see that they naturally have natural pools at those 3 different temperatures. And if you can lie back with your head underwater, it's the best, with your head back and your face up. And some children can do that, but many children can't, and they'll get bored and whatever. So you could be in a jacuzzi or in a bathtub, and you can simply read to them. You can tell them stories. I would not have them watching a video, and the reason for that is that when you're watching videos, you're stimulating a lot of free radicals. Basically, it's producing dopamine, and that's why they like to just sit there and do videos. Quite often, any kind of digital stimulation will produce more dopamine, which gives them focus. But telling them a story is much more low dopamine stimulating, because it also stimulates estrogen, it stimulates serotonin, it stimulates oxytocin, because the loving parent is present at that time, or holding them if you're in a spa. And listening to music is another thing, or whatever way you feel you could keep your child interested without using strong digital stimulation. But if that's the only way you can do it, that's the way you can do it. The hot water treatment's going to be great. Also, the infrared saunas are also good, anything that heats the body up. And if you buy a spa, and again, you clearly said it was good, non-chlorine, even if you put chlorine in your spa, leave the top open, bubble it for half an hour, and wait a day, there won't be any chlorine in it. So that's another way, but better to do the chlorine-free systems so you're not getting chlorine into the system. Again, we have so many reasons why we have autism, but a big part of it is that our gut is not making the right molecules in the body to activate vitamin D. Vitamin D activates the macrophage to stop infection. And if your vitamin D isn't working right, then infections become chronic, the chronic stress I mentioned, in the brain. The body can't heal when there's inflammation, chronic inflammation. So having good probiotics is like really important. The microbiome, and more everybody's talking about, because that's where it all starts, is in the gut. And if we want to have healthy gut function, it's important that we do take the probiotics. But what they do is they will tend to make a protein called GCMAF, glycoprotein, macrophage activating factor. Another name for it is vitamin binding protein. If you have a healthy gut, it will tend to activate your vitamin D. Your vitamin D will then activate your immune system to put out the oxidative stress fires, and the body can heal itself. If you don't have that, then your body's backup system is to have heat. High heat or high cold, either one, will stimulate these heat shock proteins. The reason, these people that go out in the freezing cold in the river, in the water and so forth, they live long lives and they're very healthy and vibrant. They condition themselves to go into the freezing cold water, because when your body hits freezing cold, it then has a reaction to produce, and again, to compensate. And so once again, it produces these heat shock proteins. But you can also just do infrared saunas, or you can go right into a hot bath, or you can have a spa. But when you have spas, they often say, you shouldn't have high temperature for children, so that freaks parents out. And I keep looking, where is there any research? Nowhere, anywhere does it say children cannot endure high temperature. If you have MS or high blood pressure, then you shouldn't take hot baths. But if you don't have MS or high blood pressure, it's perfectly safe. And so it's just a myth that a child shouldn't be in hot water. And it's a myth that a bigger myth is that when your child has a fever that you should take Tylenol to suppress the fever. One of the problems with the vaccinations is doctors even tell mothers, here, take Tylenol so you don't have a fever. And if you do have a fever of 101, make sure to take Tylenol. Well, if you have a fever of a 101 after a vaccination, or 102 or 103 or 104 or 105, that means your body is trying to fight off what was in that vaccination. And it can't do it. That's what the fever is about. It's always a backup system. The glutathione system isn't adequate. It does have a backup system. It can't run for a long period of time, so it's only used sparingly. But your body will produce a fever. Now, when you take a fever suppressant, you've just eliminated your body's protective mechanism, and then the problem only gets worse and worse. It was interesting for the people who are in the camp of understanding vaccinations and the potential of getting autism. You can see the graph that as people started using Tylenol, I forget when it was, 1960 or so, the growth of autism dramatically increased as the use of Tylenol dramatically increased. Cuba, where they use the same vaccination schedule as in America, they don't have this increase in autism, but the doctors there will not prescribe Tylenol. And you can't just buy Tylenol. It's seen as a serious drug there. And they will not prescribe it to a mother for her child if the child's having a fever from a vaccination. They understand in homeopathic medicine, it's very clear that fever is your body's mechanism to heal. And yes, sometimes the child will have seizures during a fever. The only danger there is if it was to fall and hit its head. You just have to be protective of a child. It's uncomfortable, but the brain always ends up healing itself more after a fever. Many parents report that children who have social problems, behavioral problems, they're often, and even intelligence problems, will be corrected to a great extent after getting sick and running a fever, because the fever does generate these heat shock proteins, which HSPs they're called, which do regenerate brain cells, do restore normal brain function, and help the body to heal as a backup emergency measure. But your body never uses backup emergency measures until it needs it. And if you're running a fever, that means you need it, and to suppress a fever is one of the worst things we can do. And the tragedy there is that doctors don't know that. And yet there's absolutely no research anywhere showing that a fever at 105 for days has any lasting negative effect. If it was 106, then it means that the heat shock proteins are not enough. You want to go with the antibiotic if that's one of the prescribed. So that's when you need to worry and do something else. Otherwise, you want to let the fever run itself through and take lots of antioxidants like lots of vitamin C and vitamin E.
Well, it's interesting you're talking, about this, and I've heard the same thing regarding families out there that when their children, get a fever or become sick, that, they seem to do better. I've even witnessed that myself in my own home. Even recently, maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, our son got sick and had a fever, and he had really bad flu, and I think he was sick maybe about 6 or 7 days, and he ended up coloring for the first time in a way that I had never seen him color with such detail, and even outlined it, which I had never seen before, and that was while he was sick. And so I've absolutely seen, great things. When it comes to a child, it's not fun for the child to be sick, but it's always good when there's something positive that comes from it.
So the idea is, rather than waiting to get sick to get a little improvement, is to induce that every other day, to induce some form of fever. And the same thing with the infrared saunas, which are they're low heat, which is good for the lungs, but they also heat up the body. And they say, only go 20 minutes and don't do it. If you have high blood pressure, and children shouldn't do it. And it's my opinion that absolutely children should be doing it. And there's absolutely no research showing that a child exposed to those kind of temperatures to induce a mild fever has any negative side effect. I think, they have insurance things, and there's just no studies on this, except that people have been doing this for centuries. And this is something that helps to heal the brain. And so I personally ignore that with my children. We'll sit in those saunas and we'll sweat, and we'll take we always take mineral supplements. I recommend for all parents, the most powerful is some form of trace mineral supplement for your child, which is easy for them to take. And then along with that, a few of the macro minerals that I recommend are the most important is lithium orotate. Now, not lithium carbonate, but lithium orotate will help to reduce the glutamate in the brain and produce GABA, which is that calming. They get so stressed, just the stress itself just keeps feeding on itself, and it doesn't calm them down. That's because when a child is feeling very stressed, they will deplete themselves very quickly of lithium, which is necessary to regulate the brain's ability to make brain chemicals that would calm the child. And it is the most wonderful supplement, and it's the cheapest supplement. You'll never hear about it. You won't see a huge amount of research on it. People try to disprove it. Nobody can. There's no negative side effects of it. The psychiatrist prescribes something different. That's called lithium carbonate, which is the best antidepressant there is, except that it has side effects. And they give it to bipolar, they give it for insomnia, they give it for depression, they give it for anxiety, except it has side effects because in order for lithium carbonate to get into the brain, they have to give the body toxic doses. Well, with lithium orotate, you don't need toxic doses. With zinc orotate, you don't need high doses of zinc that might suppress your copper. You don't need high doses of magnesium or potassium or calcium, because you bond them with a substance in mother's milk, which is called orotic acid, and you get lithium orotate, calcium orotate, magnesium orotate, potassium orotate, zinc orotate. And what I found is that these 5 minerals, along with all of the other trace minerals in a very fine trace form, that means very little is all the body needs, produces immediate calmness without a suppression. They're not drugs in any way. They're just simply minerals that are efficiently bonded to a substance that crosses the blood-brain barrier. And every parent should just take it themselves and notice that they're talking low doses without any side effects. And even high doses would have no side effects. It's when you make the dose 100 times, which you would never do that of anything. If you took 100 Tylenols, you would have died a long time ago. So this is a simple, safe mineral. It's over the counter. People can learn more about that at my website. But that's super minerals for men and boys, and super minerals for girls and women. And that helps to calm. And I think any parent of an autistic child or anybody can benefit from that, because it will lower your stress levels, in my experience, again and again. Having promoted this substance for 15, 16 years, never selling, basically 600,000 people have taken this, and never a negative side effect or story from it. Occasionally I have somebody who's taken it for a while. They're able to go off their antidepressants. They said, this is amazing. But now I'm starting to feel a little tired. And I go, that's because when you're functioning at a higher level of functioning, then your body needs other nutrients to function at that higher level. So you might want to, add some other supplements, which I recommend as well. People need, I think, if you have high-functioning brain, fast-functioning brain, the fuel today in our diet really doesn't to give us enough. And so there's ways to amplify that. But basically, the super minerals are great. I also, for the most important thing, I want to make sure we have time to talk about, you want to talk about it, restoring the gut microbiome, because all children with autism have some variation of stomach digestive problems. That's ultimately, as I mentioned in the beginning, is if we're stressed, we can't digest our food. And it starts with, if we don't have the right probiotics in our gut, now being called the microbiome, then it's hard to make GCMAF, that's the macrophage activating factor, which activates your immune system, so your immune system can go in and repair the body. And Dr. Bradstreet found that using GCMF was helping to actually reverse autism. And he says over 1,000 children out of 3,000, but it helped everybody. Shortly after that conference, he died. Some people say it was suicide, some people say it was murder, whatever. And then several other doctors since then, using naturopathic methods for health, have disappeared and so forth. So it's a little scary for doctors now even to recommend this kind of stuff. But I want people to know that this is out there. They can do their research. One of the code phrases for it is this molecule called GCMAF, and it has been shut down by the FDA and several authorities. It opens up again and so forth. But there are natural ways to restore the gut bacteria. My favorite is a product out of Switzerland called Bravo yogurt. Make a homemade yogurt with 42 probiotics, and those probiotics then actually come together to make the GCMF plus many other beneficial things, and they're finding it very helpful in autism. But for some autistic children, as you know, handling dairy is very difficult. So it's very exciting now that they finally figured out, and the Swiss scientists who discovered Bravo yogurt, they created Bravo capsules by dehydrating the yogurt and take it to capsule. But for children who don't do capsules, they also are just, coming out with the non-dairy version of a fermented drink that comes from 42 strains of probiotics that are often, some of those strains are missing in the gut. It's not a matter of how many probiotics. I mean, in terms of units of a particular probiotic, it's getting all the different strains, and most of your probiotics only have 3 strains, whereas you might be missing, 6 others. So what they've done is they put together a very simple thing for parents to make a fermented drink from apple juice, orange juice, or just water and lemon and a prune, and you add 4 different mixtures of probiotics and let it sit overnight in the refrigerator, and you have a delicious drink. Now, the key thing is with a child with autism, if you start this drink that you make, you'd only start with just a teaspoon because it's going to begin killing the bad bacteria, the overgrowth gut. But eventually you work it up to an ounce or 2 a day for a child. It's absolutely delicious. They'll want more, but you don't give them more of the gut, the die-off of the bad bacteria in the gut.
And so when you're talking about the fermented, you mentioned the capsules. Do they have the non-dairy form of the capsules as well? And how would you do a lower dose of that?
They only have the capsule version of the non-dairy, of the dairy form.
Oh, gotcha.
That's for, you can swallow that. But for some children, and that would be the most powerful, but still, for some children, taking capsules is hard. And if you were to just swallow the powder, you can open the capsule and put it in the mouth, and it will just dissolve in the mouth, and that tastes really good, and that's okay. But we're really excited about the new non-dairy one because it's actually a drink, and kids can drink it, and they'll love to drink it. You could mix it with water so that they feel like they're getting plenty of it, but you only take a little bit. And parents can take it as well, because what happens with stress, when we're stressed, it causes the high cortisol causes inflammation in our gut, and when we get inflammation in our gut, we start losing the good bacteria as the bad bacteria overpopulates. It's just the condition of the gut allows the more the candida and those types of things to multiply faster. They're like weeds that grow in the gut, and we want to restore the positive good bacteria in there. And this, people have been using fermented drinks forever. And now you can buy them in the grocery store or whatever, but even still, they're only like 3 strains of probiotics. So they figured out how to transfer the same strains, 42 different strains, and make drink. You make it in 24 hours and just have it in the refrigerator, and it lasts for 10 days. So that's a really wonderful new thing that parents can add to their regime of supporting their children nutritionally with the highest, finest version of probiotic available. That's called non-dairy Bravo.
Now, does age matter? Let's say for the families listening right now, and their children might be a little older. Does it matter, where they're starting? Did you still see outcomes, positive outcomes when you were working with children of all ages?
I have seen the most positive and fast outcomes the younger they are. At every stage, there's always going to be improvement. How much improvement is hard to say. But I've seen improvement at every age, even for adults. That's the point of this, is that immediately it will begin to help the body to fight off this oxidative stress, which allows the body's natural healing mechanisms to come into play, and improvement will occur. And I personally think that, as I mentioned before, I do this for autistic children. I do it for children with ADHD, seeing amazing results. But for adults as well, what people don't realize is that stress is affecting all of us, and it's affecting our ability to feel love, to feel peace of mind. If you do something exciting, it's natural for you to want to relax afterwards. But many people, when they relax, they either feel restless and want to do something more exciting, or they feel bored, which then motivates feel more excited, or they feel despair, which motivates them to overeat and so forth. So these, this restlessness, this inability to relax, this boredom, these are signs that your body is not responding, heal itself after the overexcitement. Whenever we're overexcited and we're experiencing lots of pleasure and joy and happiness, that's a lot of free radicals being produced. And if we don't have the antioxidants to neutralize those free radicals, then a symptom of that is that we're not able to relax, we're not able to feel peace and a lack of restlessness during our day. And that should, normal life should be, it's kind of like a wave function of excitement, enthusiasm, relaxation, and peacefulness, and love, and contentment. There's this place of contentment, then excitement, then contentment, excitement. There's activity, and then there's relaxation. There's interest and motivation, and then there's a lack of boredom. You would experience a peacefulness. And we're just missing that in our life, and it really is the body's inability to produce the antioxidants as well as other nutrients necessary to find that balance. And our children in a state of chronic stress, it just depletes their body of all the nutrients, and the regeneration of brain cells does not occur. Brain cells are dying all the time for everybody and being regenerated. But if we don't have the right nutrition, they don't regenerate.
Now, we have a few minutes left, and I feel like the families are just getting so much from this. I want to make sure at the end, for the people listening, don't worry, we're definitely going to give the website, and it'll be in the digital workbook as well. So we'll make sure we have all that information. But for the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about, again, for the families, to spend a little bit of time on that. What are some tips that a husband and wife could do right now after listening to this? What could they do to kind of, remember first why they fell in love before the diagnosis, right? And, how can they maybe get through when, especially those hard days when maybe the child's having a huge meltdown or the child's being aggressive or there's, lack of sleep, I think is a big key factor to a lot of the families out there. And often it's sometimes one parent having more of the burden of, trying to figure this all out by themselves. So, is there a couple of things that maybe you can help guide them on? And then, of course, we'll send them to your sites and your books. But, just for the ones listening right now.
Okay, for sleep, one of the best things is 30 to 45 minutes in a hot tub or a hot bath, and you could be doing that with your child, and then you'd both be getting the benefit of it. That's A. B is venting. I talked about venting before, and particularly the woman needs to do it more so than the man. If the man needs to do it, he should go off and do it with other men. He should not do it so much with his wife. That will save so much. It just shuts a woman down. If a woman vents for a little while, then a man comes out and vents equally. As opposed, he could do it, a little bit, but basically you want to create this space where a woman can just express her frustrations, disappointments, concerns to her partner about what's going on, and the more she can do it, not directly about him, so it's easy for him to listen, but these are just what I'm going through today, trying to balance my schedule, so to speak. And his job is not to do anything or say anything. And for men, this is really hard to do because he wants to try to fix it or tell her, don't worry about it, it's not a problem. But to know emotions are like a wave. If you can hear the negative, the positive has a chance to come back up. And you just kind of go up and down like that. Venting is really key. Touch is very, very important for women, that men take time to hug their wives 4 times a day. Now, I do something even cute with my wife. First thing in the morning, I want to give her a hug. I say 1. And then when I'm off to work or she's off to work, I say, give her a hug and say 2. And when we come back, 3. So we actually count that we get at least 4 hugs a day, okay?
I love that.
It's really very sweet. It's very fun. Because I always thought I gave her 4 hugs a day, and I was talking about in the seminar, and she said, no, you don't. So now we have proof of it. She loves it. I love it. And because what it does, a hug, and you count to 3 or 4 seconds, the hug, just a nice squeeze, and for 4 seconds, 3 or 4 seconds. And it actually stimulates, that physical contact stimulates a hormone called oxytocin that will lower a woman's stress hormone and increase her estrogen, which allows her to feel happier and more loving. And this is like really key that she gets this on a regular basis, and he looks forward to doing it and knows that it makes her feel better. Another thing is when they meet, always for the first minute, when a man comes home or she comes home first, the first minute of greeting The woman needs to focus on the love that she has for him by being delighted to see him. She may have 10 complaints. She might have 5 disasters to report, but not the first thing. It's always the first contact that you make with your husband is that if you're delighted to see him and you go in for the hug. He, on the other hand, should find you. That's his job, because when you look for a woman, her oxytocin levels go up. It's not like he'll look for the TV or whatever, But
or the bathroom.
Or the bathroom. Right? Bathroom comes first, okay? But then find her first. Find her and give her that hug. And for her, get the hug and then just be happy to see him just for a minute or so. And it's not like what you say or do. It's just be happy to see him. Glad you're home. Good day. Have a good day. And not like you're really looking for a conversation. Just lighting up in his presence. And you can do that even if you're faking it for a minute. So he knows always the first thing when he gets home or when she gets home, he's going to get a positive message. Women don't realize how important that is to men. It's hard to know, but it is. And then you ignore him for a little while, as opposed to come at him with, I need your help with this or this or this or this. That's all fine to do, but let that moment be there where you first come together. It's always positive. Then create some space and then say, would you help me? Or I need to vent about something, or I have some problems. What do you think? Would you help me with this? Those are all fine things to do. But keep in mind that men need at least a good 20 minutes when they get home from a stressful day to sort of rebuild their testosterone so they have more to offer. Women often need more support to share their feelings as a way to rebuild their estrogen so their stress levels go down. It gives them more nurturing energy, freedom to give. So those are some practical takeaways from our talk together today. And as you said, we got lots of videos, and my new book is Beyond Mars and Venus, and particularly for understanding the way the brain works and oxidative stress and autism and ADHD and all of that. I wrote a book called Staying Focused in a Hyper World.
And they can find all of that on marsvenus.com, correct?
That's right, marsvenus.com, or they can always just Google my name, John Gray, and it will come up.
And what message do you want to leave the parents with right now? I mean, I just feel like this has just been so helpful, and honestly, I've been a fan of yours for a very, very long time, so this was just such a treat to get to talk with you. But what message do you want to leave for parents that might feel a little bit, sad, or maybe they don't have, they're feeling helpless? What message do you want them to feel to walk away feeling maybe a little bit more empowered?
Well, one is that you did ask me, what did I see? And from my experience of even a few days applying some of these insights, children who didn't talk began to talk 25 words suddenly. And other children with Tourette's type things where they were impulsive, gone away forever after 2 or 3 days of the hot water treatment with the mineral treatment and some of the extra nutritional treatment. I'm just so excited about this very simple non-dairy Bravo drink that you can have at your house all the time, and know that you're restoring the gut microbiome to these children, because it's just finding that missing key to help the body come back into balance so the child can develop. But above everything, it's the love behind it all that helps our children to heal. They just need the extra physical support. And there's something about being challenged with you when your children are hurting, when your children are falling behind, when your children are more challenged. It challenges us to rise to the plate, to open our hearts with unconditional love. And while it's, as people say, parenting, it's the hardest job in the world, but the most rewarding. If we can get the right support, parenting a child with autism can open our hearts even further. But we have to remember, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, giving just everything to the child is not productive to them if you're not also taking time to give to yourself.
That's just beautiful. I am so grateful for talking with you today, John, and for those listening, please do yourself a favor and go to marsvenus.com. There is just an amazing amount of information there. Again, thank you for taking the time, John.
You're very welcome. Thank you.